What advice do you have for the everyday real estate agent, the real estate agent that is working in their business every day, pounding the pavement, pounding the funds? What are you telling those agents to do to be successful?
Yeah, well, let's look at that question through two different lenses. The first is from a business perspective, and the second will be from a marketing perspective. So
Okay.
from a business perspective, Glenda, I have always believed in this idea of prioritizing revenue. Tom and I talk about this a lot. This idea of like lead with revenue. And that means the first thing that you do in the morning isn't checking your email inbox, which is somebody else's to-do list. The first thing you do in the morning is figuring out what are the levers I'm going to pull to generate revenue for my business. Now, you and I both know there are a couple different levers that they can fall into. You can do things that are, call it relatively labor intensive, where you're trading time for money, or you're making an investment in the future of business so you have economies of scale. So as an example, me shooting a video for my social media profile and posting it online may or may not necessarily drive business today, but I'm making an investment in the future to drive down my customer acquisition cost. And so there are you can have this kind of combination of what I would call a checkings account approach and a savings account approach, or an investment portfolio approach. The checking account approach is like texting people in your SOI, making circle dialing around a listing, right? Checking back in with the people in your CRM you haven't followed up with a long time, DMing a couple folks on, that have maybe interacted with your stories on Instagram, like really boots on the ground, kind of last mile type of sales. And then the savings account approach is more on that kind of media and content approach we've been talking about, which is shooting the videos, creating things of value, things of that nature. So like, let's just kind of put that in those two categories. From a business perspective, this is like, I'm going to sound like Mike Ferry here, but like I am just starting every day off focusing on getting some revenue into the business. And I love that. Like that we should never lose that. No matter what stage of the business we're in, we should always be focusing on like that main priority, and not letting the seemingly important things that really don't matter fill up our calendars. And that is probably the great sin we have in real estate, is that like you're not doing the work when you're planning to do the work, preparing to do the work, right? Thinking about the work, talking to your friends about doing the work. Like you're doing the work when you're doing the work. And I think we kind of forget that. And so I'll give you an example of this, Glenda. In real estate, last year or this year, I had a chance to go to about 35 different cities across America, speak to probably somewhere around the ballpark of 40 to 50,000 agents face to face. And one thing I learned is really successful agents, they break the vicious cycle. And the vicious cycle affects everybody in real estate. And the way it goes is this: if you've got nobody in your pipeline, you got no prospects, you got no appointments coming up, you tend to, after you've panicked, you tend to shift towards things that help fill your pipeline. You start marketing, you start selling, and all of a sudden, sure enough, your pipeline fills up. All right? Magically. And then once your pipeline is full, Glenda, what is the first thing that most agents stop doing?
They take their foot off the gas.
That's exactly right. They like the thing that they did to fill their pipeline, they stop doing, because they focus on the business is literally right in front of them. And they kind of get in this like, things are going great. Oh, no, they're not moment. And it's this vicious cycle that happens in real estate where you go from rags to riches and back to rags. I mean, like this cycle is any other real business in the world doesn't wake up and says, in next month, we're going to start getting some customers. No, like every business operates in this world where they're always acquiring customers and always servicing customers. And so as a real estate agent, you have got to structure your day that no matter how busy you are always focusing on getting your next customer. That's the business it's not a nice to have, it's the business that we're in. And I think that's an important distinction. Now, I can give you 100 different specific tactical marketing ideas, but I think Glenda, to start, we got to fix that problem. We got to break that vicious cycle. And we do that by prioritizing revenue as part of our daily operating procedures.
I love that. I had this lady who looked at one of my listings. She had her own broker, and she was let's call it I don't want to say celebrity influencer, but she sold a product on social. She invented a product and sold it on social. And so as she's looking through this house, I keep hearing this cha-ching, like this little notification on her phone, like a cash register. And finally I turned around and I said to her, I said, somebody's wanting to try to get in touch with you, because it just kept going off and off and off. She goes, oh, no. She goes, that's every time somebody buys something on my Shopify, it dings like that, like a cash register. I'm like, seriously? She's like, yeah. She's like, it reminds me, like, I need to be doing whatever it takes to make the cash register ring. And so what I decided to do was like every time my phone rings with a prospect, I have it set like the cash register ring. Every time that I get a lead through my my website, I have that ding set up like a cash register, because that's when I'm making money. That's my opportunity to make money. And I think that when the phone rings, the first thing, we don't want to answer it. I don't want to talk to them. And I'm thinking to myself, you literally make money talking to people. Why don't you want to talk to anybody?
Yeah. It's but first off, that's an amazing story, and I love it. And I think I'm gonna change my phone to ring with the cash register ring, because I love that. And I think what's actually super interesting is that there are ways I'll give everybody a pro tip here. So I wrote a book with Phil Jones and Chris Smith called Exactly What to Say for Real Estate Agents. That book now has sold 250,000 copies, which is mind blowing when Phil shares that data with us, because it had pretty humble beginnings. And so, one thing we talked about in the book is this idea of this framework for prospecting called Opening Fact Question, OFQ. And the basic idea is just a way to structure a outreach to start a conversation. And I was a part of the largest listing attraction experiment in history. Just a quick sidebar here. In Q4 of last year, we got together with 2,300 agents to participate in a program called 100K in 100 days. We developed the plan, some strategies, some marketing strategies, some sales strategies. We helped those agents generate over $7.5 billion in closed listings in 100 days, literally within 100 days. And that was Q4 of 2023, which many would regard as probably the very bottom of, when we look back now, probably the very bottom of the housing market in terms of just the number of transactions. It was an awful quarter, and we absolutely lit the cash register up. And we did that by focusing on using very specific tactics for starting conversations. So one thing I would do if I was listening to this podcast is every time there's news in real estate, this is an opportunity to start a conversation. Glennda, I'm not using the same boring status quo script that everyone else is using. I am becoming the filter for my customers. And so I'll give you a really specific example. If I were to reach out to you today, Glennda, let's say you're in my database, you're in my SOI, I wanted to check in with you. I would say, hey, Glennda, I've been talking to a lot of my clients recently about the market. Since the Fed cut rates, we're seeing a pretty big uptick in activity. Out of curiosity, how has the recent drop in mortgage rates impacted your real estate plans this fall? That's it. And listen, I know a couple dorks who are going to listen to this podcast go, Jimmy, the Fed doesn't impact mortgage rates. They affect the Fed fund rate, which affects the 10-year treasury. I get all of that. But you know what the consumer sees every day? They see the fact that the Fed cuts rates and all of a sudden mortgage rates are going down. So they interpret it like, I understand the technicality here, okay, but we ain't gonna get bonus points by explaining how the Fed fund rate's tied to the treasury. Like let's just address the audience here. But it's like, hey, out of curiosity, how has the recent drop to mortgage rates impacted your real estate plans this fall? And this is not a yes or no question. This is a conversation starter. And that's the beauty of a script like this. So when I'm thinking about the news that's happening in real estate, I think of myself as this filter. I'm consuming news from every publication out there, CNBC. I'm following people on X. I'm using Perplexity AI. I'm using all these tools, and I see something that's interesting. I'm saying, you know what? That's probably worth talking to some people about. Like I saw recently, Glenda, the number, this is Redfin put this data out, the number of mortgage lock-ins is up 68% month over month from August to September. Why does that matter? It matters because the mortgage lock-ins is a forward-looking indicator of transactions, meaning that like if that number is dropping, then transactions is going to drop. If that number is rising, then transactions are going to rise. So I'm always using, like, if I'm a real estate agent listening to this podcast, I'm saying, I got to prioritize revenue, like Glenn and I've been talking about. I got to really kind of condition myself to be excited to be talking to people. And the way to solve that problem is get really good at starting conversations. Well, the way to get really good at starting conversations is to study what's happening in the market and use that as a means to say, yeah, let's talk. Let's have a conversation. And what we learned from that program I mentioned, 100K in 100 days, is that 11 real estate conversations equals 1 listing. So if you have 11 serious conversations about selling your house, right? One of those are going to transact. So instead of taking this really big thing, like let's say, Glenda, people who are watching this podcast have a goal of getting $250,000 in GCI in 2025. Right? Which is a fantastic living. Let's say you want to get that number. Okay, well, maybe that's 35 transactions. Okay, that feels intimidating if you've done 3, right? Like last year. Okay, well, 35, that's kind of about 3 per month. Let's give ourselves a little bit of room there. Okay, 3 per month. Well, that means I got to be talking to 30 plus people per month, which means I got to be really probably talking about 1 to 2 unique people per day. Now, all of a sudden, that really difficult big number that's scary, 30 plus transactions, becomes, only a handful of conversations per day. And the reality is that if we look back at our calendars, so few of us are having those conversations. So we got to just design our entire day around that if we want to get to the kind of the end goal we want to get to.